The HOA called my houseboat a biohazard, so I floated it right into their annual charity gala. They wanted peace and uniformity, so I gave them sirens lawyers and a plaque with my name on it. What happens when a retired tech guy outsmarts a power-tripping Karen with a clipboard? You're about to find out. Now look, I didn't buy land in rural Arizona to start a war. I bought it because I was tired of pretending to care about quarterly metrics and Karen potlucks at work. 33 years running telecom systems for people who thought Wi-Fi was a kind of yogurt, and I finally cashed out early, bought myself a quiet ranch wrapped around a private lake. You hear that? Private, not public, not just me, some geese, and a retirement dream called Betty Floats. My homemade houseboat slash jugging man cave. So I'm minding my business, painting Betty's name on the side with a brush I stole from my niece's art set, and boom, here she comes. Barbara Clench, HOA president, neighborhood tyrant, clipboard carrier, power walker, part-time dictator, the kind of woman who thinks volunteer position means she rules by divine appointment. She screeches up in a golf cart like she's late for a televised HOA Olympics, sunglasses tighter than her personality, holding a folder full of sins I hadn't committed yet. And she opens her mouth like the gates of HOA hell. Get that disgusting thing off our lake, my boat, on my lake, surrounded by my property. But Barbara, she declared war with the confidence of someone who just read one clause of a homeowner brochure and thought she had a law degree. I told her kindly, because I'm a gentleman, that the lake sits entirely inside my parcel. She blinked like I'd just said I was from Mars. Then she whipped out her phone and barked into it like she was ordering a drone strike. That's when the 911 call happened. You ever seen a woman report a boat like it's a break-in? Because she did. Used phrases like environmental hazard, illegal structure, and my personal favorite, visual terrorism. 15 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser rolls up. Deputy gets out looking like someone just canceled his lunch break. I hand him my deed packet, signed, sealed, highlighted. He reads it, nods, and gives me the universal, yep, this is dumb look. Meanwhile, Barbara's over there, flapping like a windsock in a thunderstorm, yelling at him for not immediately arresting my houseboat. Ma'am, he owns the lake. That's all he said, 6 words. You could hear the collective gasp from the HOA Facebook group from here. Barbara, she short-circuited like a toaster in a bathtub, walked in a tight circle muttering something about emergency board meetings and deed fraud by aquatic invasion. I just stood there, paintbrush in one hand, cold brew in the other, wondering how much longer I could let this go on before I laughed loud enough to make her explode. That night, I sat on my porch swing, watching Betty bob gently in the moonlight, peaceful, still, legal. But I knew that was only round 1. Barbara Clench wasn't just mad. She was mobilizing. And the next time she came after me, she'd bring the whole HOA army stick around, because next she delivers a $2,700 0 fine with a drone. You're going to want popcorn for this one. Barbara Clench once fined a man for planting marigolds that were emotionally aggressive, so naturally my boat gave her hives. To her, Betty Floats wasn't just an eyesore, it was a floating rebellion against everything beige and boring. You'd think she'd just spotted a haunted yacht, the way she stormed back across the property line like she was chasing a demon with a clipboard. The very next morning, and I do mean morning, I was sipping my coffee thinking about maybe going fishing, when I heard the sound. A golf cart with a wobbling wheel and an engine that wheezed like it had asthma pulled up in my driveway. And there she was, dressed like she was headed to a funeral for freedom, holding a thick envelope. She marched up to my porch, dropped it like a subpoena, and said, "You have been formally cited for aesthetic violence via floating structure," then turned on her orthopedic heel and sped off so fast her scarf did a full loop. Inside the envelope was a glossy printed photo of my houseboat, taken with a telephoto lens from behind what I can only assume was a shrub. She'd even circled the chimney with a red pen like she was analyzing a crime scene, and under it she'd written, "Looks like a meth lab on stilts." The violation carried a $2,750.00 fine, payable to the Whispering Cedars HOA. I laughed so hard I nearly snorted coffee through my nose. Aesthetic violence? Lady, the only violent thing here was your font choice. I didn't respond. Didn't argue. I just quietly walked down to the dock and took down my private lake sign, the one she hated so much. Not because I was giving up, but because I wanted to see how she'd behave when she thought she'd won. Sure enough, within 24 hours, my inbox exploded with an email titled, HOA Victory, Troublemaker Retreats, written entirely in caps lock with 3 exclamation points, like she thought she was storming Normandy. She even attached a celebratory .gif of fireworks over an HOA logo. It was like being trolled by Microsoft Word. That's when I knew. This wasn't about the boat. This was about power. Barbara needed to win, not because she was right, but because she didn't know how to be wrong. I sat back, opened my old property folder, and remembered something I'd buried for a day just like this. A clause. A dusty, oddly specific clause I'd found during my due diligence, tucked away in the original 1970S zoning document. The one that confirmed the lake, from surface to sediment, was entirely mine. I hadn't needed it. Until now. I picked up the phone and called Marcus Thorne, my lawyer, my friend, and the only man I know who could quote water law faster than a preacher quotes Leviticus. Marcus is the kind of guy who alphabetizes his highlighters and considers litigation a contact sport. I told him everything. He chuckled, low and slow, and said, "Well, looks like Barbara just screamed herself into a hornet's nest of clauses." That's when we started digging. Not just for proof, but for ammunition. She thought I waved the white flag. Nah, I was just digging up the receipts. And Barbara was about to get itemized. Subscribe now, because next time she tries to tow my boat with a landscaping truck. My lawyer once said, always read the fine print. That's where people leave their fingerprints, and buddy, we found a whole handprint smeared in HOA nonsense. While Barbara was out front yelling about property values like she was protecting the last apple pie in America, Marcus and I were buried deep in zoning records, land plats, and a 3-ring binder so old it still smelled like Nixon's cologne. We struck gold on page 42 of a dusty county document titled Water Rights and Adjacent Development Exceptions, 1973. There it was in perfectly boring legalese. The lake was explicitly excluded from all future HOA jurisdiction, protected by a clause older than Barbara's last original thought. Marcus leaned back, tapped the paper with his pen, and grinned like a man who'd just found the HOA equivalent of a cheat code. "You realize," he said, "this isn't just a clause, it's a legal paddle. And you're about to row that boat straight through her ego." Meanwhile, Barbara had entered her super HOA Saiyan phase. She issued another violation letter, this one accusing me of unauthorized rippling. I didn't know you could criminalize physics, but apparently she found a way. 2 days later, she installed a motion-activated loudspeaker on the edge of her property. Every time I walked within 20 feet of the waterline, it blared, "Trespass alert! Return to authorized zone!" Like I was a duck crossing into Area 51, I started walking past it in different hats just to trigger it for fun. Cowboy hat? Trespasser. Fedora? Still a threat. Viking helmet? Double violation. That's when I knew it was time to document everything. I installed my own discrete cameras, hidden better than her logic, and started recording her every move. And folks, let me tell you, this woman was performing like she was auditioning for Real Housewives, HOA edition. She patrolled the lake in her golf cart with a flashlight at noon. She took pictures of squirrels and claimed they were agents of noise. One time she measured my dock with a laser pointer and shouted, "This is not code-compliant dock behavior." I don't even know what that means, but she said it like she was quoting scripture. Then something unexpected happened. One by one, neighbors started talking. Quiet ones, kind ones, the type who mow your lawn when you're sick. They came over, dropped their voices, and said things like, "We've been dealing with this lady for years." Or, "She once tried to fine me for waving too loudly." Turns out I wasn't her first rodeo. I was just the first one who brought a lawyer and a houseboat to the arena she built her kingdom on bylaws. Billy just wished she had been built in the arena he built her kingdom on bylaws. I was about to bulldoze it with a notarized napkin from 1973. Stick around, because next? Yeah? She tries to call the EPA on my coffee maker. Nothing says middle-age rebellion like launching a boat to prove a point to someone wearing orthopedic rage sandals. I had my coffee in one hand, my legal documents in the other, and my houseboat Betty Floats hooked up to a specialized crane like I was about to christen the USS You Picked the Wrong Guy, Barbara. I'd invited no one officially, but it turns out when you move a boat with a license plate, folks show up. Neighbors, the mailman, even the UPS guy took a break just to see what HOA chaos smelled like up close. Betty lifted into the air like a majestic finger to HOA tyranny. And right on cue, like she had a siren installed in her soul, Barbara came barreling down the hill in her golf cart, hair frizzed by either wind or pure fury. She screeched to a halt and hollered, "This is vandalism on water!" I kid you not. She was holding an oversized, laminated map of the community like she was a pirate hunting buried logic. Before I could greet her with my usual calm smile, she whipped out her phone, muttered trespassing and environmental endangerment, and dialed 911 for what had to be the 5th time this month. 15 minutes later, Lieutenant Carl Womack arrived. Same deputy from last time, only now he had backup, a younger officer who looked like he'd rather be investigating sandwich theft. Carl stepped out of the cruiser with the kind of sigh that said, "Barbara again." The man had a permanent eye twitch, and I could tell every HOA call aged him 2 months. Barbara rushed up to him like a child reporting a broken crayon, yelling, "He's back at it, and now the boat is floating!" Carl turned to me. I handed him the folder, same one as last time, deed, survey, lake clause, notarized like a wedding license. He didn't even open it. Just nodded like a man who finally memorized the punchline. "Mr. Granger owns the lake," he said. "This isn't a police matter." Barbara's jaw dropped like a garden gnome in a hurricane. And then it got better. Because the crowd had grown, residents, curious HOA members, even a teenager live streaming with the caption, "HOA Karen vs. Floating Facts." When Carl said I owned the lake, someone actually clapped. Barbara turned beet red, spun toward the audience, and shouted, "You're all witnessing an act of maritime disrespect." I don't know what that means, but it sounded like she invented a new naval crime. I sipped my coffee, waved at the cameras, and watched Betty Floats glide across the lake like she knew she had just won the law doesn't care how many committees you chair. And Barbara? She was about to learn. You can't file a complaint against Gravity Stick Around, because next she organizes a town hall with a slideshow titled Floating Menace, a community threat. Barbara Clench once filed a complaint against the Sun for being too aggressive on Tuesdays. So when she called an emergency HOA meeting with the subject line, "Community Emergency Aquatic Aggression Escalates," I knew she was about to turn my floating weekend getaway into DEFCON 1. I showed up early just to grab the good seat, back row near the donut table, perfect for watching a power-hungry meltdown unfold. The projector was already humming when I walked in, and Barbara was pacing like a stage mom before a toddler beauty pageant. She wore her finest emergency cardigan and had a laser pointer holstered like a weapon of mass overreaction. The slideshow was titled in bold red font, "Operation Lakeside Menace." Slide 1. A zoomed-in photo of my boat, Betty Floats, labeled Floating Hazard Zone, unlicensed aquatic structure. I have expected a theme song to kick in. She went full Broadway, claimed my boat disrupted neighborhood harmony, destabilized local bird behavior, and threatened the visual tranquility of the shoreline. She even quoted something she called the HOA Visual Serenity Doctrine, which sounded like she'd scribbled it on the back of a CVS receipt. A few people nodded politely, mostly the same folks who think Garbage Day is a religious ritual. Others shifted in their chairs, clearly realizing they were being dragged into a midlife crisis wrapped in a PowerPoint. When it was finally my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even stand up right away. I just walked to the front with a thumb drive and asked the treasurer if I could borrow the screen. Then I pulled up the survey overlays, the plat maps, the original zoning exclusions from 1973, and, oh yes, the HOA's own founding documents, which Barbara had conveniently forgotten. I clicked to the highlighted clause. The HOA shall not exert jurisdiction over private lakes held within a single parcel. The room got so quiet you could hear the HOA treasurer sweating. And then came the final blow. Courtesy of Mr. Donnie Haverfield, 78 years old, suspenders, and a voice that cracked like firewood. He stood up slowly, pointed at the map, and said, "That lake's never been yours. I helped dig the ditch in '74. The silence popped like a balloon. Murmurs turned to gasps. One woman whispered, "Oh my God, Donnie has receipts." Then the room erupted, questions flying, Barbara blinking like a robot who lost her Wi-Fi. Barbara tried to speak, but her voice cracked mid-sentence, and instead of words we got a shrill puff of air and a pointing finger. Someone clapped. Then another. Then the room exploded like a popcorn bag in a microwave. And me? I just sat down, grabbed another donut, and let the applause wash over me like lake water on a smug little boat. The room clapped. Barbara's eye twitched, and my houseboat, still floating, legally smug. Stick around, next she sues me for emotional algae. Yeah, that's a real phrase she uses in court. HOA court filings are like soap operas for people who think petunias are political. So when I got served papers titled Violation of Community Harmony and Emotional Algae Distress, I didn't laugh. I cackled like a villain in a bathtub full of receipts. Barbara had finally escalated things to a courtroom, convinced she could out-legislate me with her binder full of delusions and a lawyer who looked like he moonlighted as a mall Santa during off-season lawsuit. Her lawsuit claimed I caused emotional turmoil through prolonged houseboat exposure and, I quote, brought reputational mildew upon Whispering Cedars. She was seeking damages, a cease and desist order on all lake usage, and, get this, mandatory repainting of my boat in approved community colors. Meanwhile, my lawyer Marcus was already sharpening his counterclaim like it was a fencing foil. She wants war, he said. Let's give her the Geneva Convention on HOA fraud. That's when our anonymous friend came forward. A retired bookkeeper and longtime resident named George, we'll call him that because that is his name, handed Marcus a folder labeled Suspicious Expenditures, Clench Era. Inside, records of Barbara approving HOA funds for personal landscaping, a new mailbox shaped like a goose, valued at $740.00, and invoices labeled Community Enrichment, Private Use Only. My favorite line item? Emergency Water Feature Upgrade, which turned out to be a koi pond she had installed in her backyard. But nothing topped the audio recording. Marcus queued it up like a DJ dropping a diss track. Barbara's voice, clear as a bell. Just move the money to beautification. No one checks those reports anyway. It played in the courtroom like surround sound. While Barbara froze in her chair like someone had hit pause on her humanity, she stood up, panicked, and shouted, "That recording is taken out of context. I was referring to community." Judge Marlene O'Donnell, bless her caffeine-fueled soul, leaned over the bench, tapped her gavel once, and said, "Mrs. Clench, I strongly suggest you stop talking before your HOA presidency suspends itself." Then she turned to Marcus, requested a full forensic audit of HOA finances, and issued a formal suspension of Barbara's presidency pending investigation. I swear you could hear a collective exhale from the back of the courtroom, like the building itself was tired of her nonsense. And me? I just sipped my water, nodded politely, and thought, "You sued me for floating? Lady, I just paddled into your audit." She sued me for floating. I floated into court and popped her ego like a beach ball. If shame had a search engine, Barbara would be trending under HOA Meltdown Bingo. Her plan was to restore order, restore her title, and restore whatever fantasy she had about ruling a neighborhood like it was a gated kingdom. But instead of a redemption arc, she stepped face first into the digital age with all the grace of a confused raccoon on roller skates. And it started with a fake Facebook account so obvious it might as well have been called Definitely Not Barbara Clench. She created 5 of them: Clench Supporter 47, HOA Quiana's Justice, Justice for Barbara, Karen Justice Warrior, and my personal favorite, Real Hoaf, a Fax 247. Each one posted the same paragraph of praise in different fonts, calling Barbara a brave voice in a sea of nautical lawlessness. One even accused me of running an underground dock smuggling ring. The kicker? They all made the same spelling mistake. Aquatic. If you're gonna run a misinformation campaign, maybe don't spell aquatic like it's a medieval plague. The neighborhood wasn't fooled. A teenager named Mason, who lived 2 streets over and apparently moonlights as a digital savant, took Barbara's now infamous HOA Zoom meeting meltdown and remixed it into a full-blown rap track. The chorus? "You don't own the lake, sit down Karen," catchy, auto-tuned, and absolutely brutal. It exploded online. Within 48 hours, Barbara's face was pasted on every HOA meme page in the country. One had her riding a lawnmower into a courtroom with the caption, "When HOA goes HOA beast mode." By the time she logged back into a board meeting, the HOA chat was filled with GIFs, clown emojis, and one guy asking if her bylaws came in edible paper. She tried to silence everyone by yelling, "This is a violation of HOA meeting decorum." But halfway through her monologue, the moderator muted her, again, just like before. She screamed at her screen, waving her arms in silence like she was conducting a symphony of failure. That moment alone became its own video titled "Karen Goes Silent, the Remix." That was the tipping point. The residents she'd bullied for years began speaking up. One posted screenshots of Barbara, issuing a citation for improper garden gnome clustering. Another shared an audio clip of Barbara scolding a pizza guy for blocking her mailbox for 17 seconds. It all poured out. Public opinion flipped like a bad pancake. The same board that once feared her started voting, and the vote wasn't close. Barbara Clench was removed permanently from the HOA, her clipboard was stripped, her access revoked, and her laminated bylaws were now lining a parakeet cage in someone's garage. Her HOA throne became a meme, her bylaws became birdcage liners, and I wasn't done yet. Coming up, Barbara tries to take me to court and forgets we recorded everything. I didn't want war. I wanted waffles on a boat. But Barbara gave me both. And somehow I ended up with a marina, a community barbecue, and the legal equivalent of a mic drop carved into stone. The paperwork had cleared, the county had spoken, and the final nail in Barbara's clipboard coffin had been hammered in. The lake was mine. Officially, fully, forever. I renamed it Clench Creek, not out of pettiness, okay, a little out of pettiness, but mostly as a public service. I even put up a new wooden sign at the lake entrance that read, "Clench Creek, formerly known as Nope." Below it was a smaller plaque that said, "This water was once ruled by bureaucracy. Now, it's just water again." Tourists took pictures, neighbors laughed, someone made t-shirts. Barbara, meanwhile, hadn't been seen in 3 weeks. Word was she moved out in the middle of the night, leaving behind her clipboard, a half-used book of violation slips, and a wreath made of shredded bylaws. To celebrate the end of HOA tyranny, I hosted a party at the new Marina. No speeches, just ribs, beer, and the sweet sound of nobody citing anyone for illegal use of lawn chairs. Kids fished off the dock, the same dock she once measured with a laser pointer. Someone made a cake shaped like my houseboat, complete with a little fondant Barbara waving a white flag. I didn't make a toast, but if I had, it would have been something like, "To peace, to property rights, and to never underestimating a man with a lake and a folder." Local news caught wind. They sent a camera crew who asked me how it felt to go viral for beating the HOA. I told them it wasn't about fame, it was about freedom. And breakfast on water. One reporter called me the HOA folk hero. which made me laugh until I remembered I now had neighbors asking if I'd run for city council. I politely declined. I've seen enough meetings to last a lifetime. Barbara? She's gone. Vanished like a fine print clause in an expired lease. The only trace she left was a single typed letter torn into pieces and found scattered across the cul-de-sac, like a failed apology caught in a guilt tornado. We gathered the scraps, read it out loud, then threw them in the communal fire pit while roasting marshmallows. It was poetic. It was over. As the sun dipped behind the pines, I thought about how it all started. One boat, one bully, and one little clause buried in the files no one reads. I didn't set out to fight. I just refused to float away. And maybe that's the point. You don't need to shout to stand your ground. Sometimes all it takes is a calm voice, the truth in your pocket, and the patience to let your enemies write their own downfall. Power is loud, ownership is quiet, and justice floats. This wasn't just about a lake. It was about dignity, about boundaries, about what happens when a community finally says, enough. Barbara didn't lose because I yelled louder. She lost because I knew the law better, because I listened, documented, waited, and when the time came, I showed up, quiet, steady, and absolutely unshakable. So if you're out there dealing with your own HOA nightmare, a workplace tyrant, or just someone who thinks a clipboard gives them a crown, remember this story. Remember that truth floats, and eventually, so will justice. If this story hit home for you, drop a comment below. Tell us your wildest HOA moment, or how you handled your own real-life carrot. Make sure to hit that like button if you're tired of petty power trips, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a single comeback, clapback, or clipboard takedown. Because here we don't just tell stories, we float victories. Got your own HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments. Let's laugh at the madness together, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we have another incredible story.